Who are the next great coaches in football? And which Premier League teams do we think they could end up managing? Well, to get into it on today's show, brought to you by BOYLE Sports, we've got John Mackenzie. We've also got Alex Barker. All right, Alex, let's mine your brain for the first one. Who do you think could be a future great when it comes to coaches?
I'm going to play it pretty safe. I'm going to go with the most exciting young manager in Europe, I think, which is Cesc Fabregas.
Oh, good shout, good shout.
He's managed to implement a lot of the principles that he wants in his football team and how he wants to play football in Como. This is their play style wheel at the moment for this season. And I guess this is no surprise for someone who was managed by Pep Guardiola, managed by Arsene Wenger as well, that his team kind of reflects that style of play, that possession-based style of football. They look to press very high up the pitch, dominate possession, as I've just said, progress the ball through the middle and try and keep teams pinned back towards their own goal. There also is a bit of a Roberto De Zerbi style with Cesc Fabregas. Okay. Yeah, he's spoken a lot about how he likes to bait teams forward to try and hit the space in behind. But generally speaking, I think you can categorise him as someone who is in that Pep Guardiola mold, likes to control games through possession.
Got you. I mean, doesn't everyone want to play like this these days? Does it actually work in practice, though?
Yeah, this is a really good question because I think this leads me on to the thing that separates Cesc Fabregas from other coaches that we probably hear about who play possession-based football, seem to be doing well. And that's the flexibility and adaptability. And to show that, I've got an example
go for it,
against Juventus. These were the lineups on paper. This is Como in a back five. And to give you a quick idea of what Juventus wanted to do in this game, under Tudor, they like to dominate possession as well, but one of their key players was Cambiasso, the left back. You can basically think of him as like a Riccardo Calafiori. They want to allow him to go all over the pitch, come inside, push very high up the pitch, and to allow him to do that, they would set up in a back three for large parts of the game. So Fabregas saw this and thought, how can I exploit this and cause tension in this back four? So he had his right wing back, Vojvoda, pushed him really high up the pitch with the ball. Alvaro Morata's the striker. He got him to stay on the left-hand side. And then Nico Paz and Maxence Caqueret, he got them to just hang behind this Juventus midfield line. So when Juventus were defending, they had a big dilemma in this back three, right? Because on the one hand, you want to maybe stay a bit wider because you're wary of this long ball coming into these wing backs, essentially. But also, you're wary about these midfielders getting in between the lines and receiving the ball, and you're going to be tempted to step up and try and track them. The game, as it panned out, Como end up winning 2-0, and their second goal actually comes from this right-hand side of the pitch. It's Nico Paz. When Cambiasso is out of position, Juventus took that gamble, still let him try and influence the game, but Como exploited the gap he left and ended up winning. So like I said, there are a lot of games where Como will try and dominate possession, but if Fabregas can see a weakness in the opponent, he will change up and he will find a way to exploit that weakness.
Okay, this brings me to my next question, really, in terms of where could we potentially see him going? Because do all roads lead back to Arsenal for Cesc Fabregas, for instance? But this is also a Como team. It's got more control, lesser egos, for instance. When the big boys come playing, can Fabregas step up?
I mean, this is the other side of management that can be a bit hard to quantify. There are some things I think we can be pretty certain of. Firstly, Fabregas speaks lots of languages and clearly commands respect from his players and probably will command respect from more elite players given his playing career. One thing I will focus on for this question though, right, is how he manages his players. And again, it comes back to flexibility. He's got different approaches depending on the player he's coaching. One I can name is Como's captain, Lucas da Cunha. Throughout his career, generally been more of an attacking player, more like a winger. But last season, mainly due to an injury crisis, Fabregas remade him into a number 6 and managed him quite closely. And now he is one of Como's better midfielders. I think that's a good example of Fabregas being meticulous with his coaching and taking someone aside and remaking them. Complete opposite side of the spectrum, we've got Nico Paz, who is one of the most exciting young players in Europe at the moment. Tottenham were in the summer, and Fabregas' approach with him has been letting him do his thing and building the team around him and having a bit more of a free reign. There's a good quote actually from last season. Bearing in mind, this is still when Paz, I think, is 20 years old and hasn't necessarily proven himself yet. Fabregas is saying he's a special player, he must be free to express himself, and we must not make him robotic. And that really is reflected in the way Como have played and built around Nico Paz. So again, showing he can manage not necessarily a bigger ego, but definitely a star player and getting the most out of him.
Yeah, it's so interesting. They bought him for I think it was 6 million euros. We were talking to the president of Como 1907 on the Athletic FC podcast. He said they received offers for a near enough 70 to 80 million pounds for him. him. So solid investment. But the bigger question is, where do you see Fabregas coaching or managing in the Premier League?
Well, you did kind of hint at it before. I think the obvious destination...
Those are subliminals, Alex.
I think he clearly is a natural successor to Mikel Arteta at Arsenal. Just for me, because both managers clearly have ideas about how they want to play the game, how they want their teams to look, but they have that flexibility, that adaptability in them to exploit opposition weaknesses. And I think Arsenal probably are a good destination for Fabregas in future. Maybe a long time in the future. Arteta isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
Well caveated. Well done, Alex. Very good. All right, John, is your choice as suave, as multilingual as Fabregas?
Well, I'm going for the opposite extreme, I'm afraid, because where Alex is talking about control and domination with the ball, I'm talking about a coach who is doing something very, very different, because the game is shifting in many respects. Okay. And I've got the famous quote from Pep Guardiola on the board in front of me here. And he's saying, today modern football is the way Bournemouth play, the way Newcastle, Brighton, Liverpool play. Modern football is not positional. You have to raise the rhythm. So I'm talking about a guy who is coaching in a way that isn't merely about possessing the ball, but is about causing problems for teams who are trying to do that as well. So raising the rhythm, trying to generate a little bit of chaos. Interestingly enough, in this quote, the first team that is mentioned is Bournemouth.
Is that the clue?
That's the clue.
All right. Where are you going with this?
Well, Andoni Iraola, everyone knows, has had a fantastic time in the Premier League so far. Now, you might look at that and think, well, that's great. Why don't we just sign Andoni Iraola? But obviously that's going to prove a little bit harder than it did before he arrived at Bournemouth. But why not go for the next best thing? Why not go for the guy who has worked with Andoni Iraola for a long stretch of his career so far and plays a very similar style of football. So I'm going to talk to you about a guy called Inigo Perez, who is an interesting guy, because he was, in 2022, joined Andoni Iraola at Rayo Vallecano, which is where Iraola was before he joined Bournemouth. He was the assistant coach there. And then you have this really interesting story of when Iraola joins Bournemouth, he wants to bring Inigo Perez with him, but actually can't do so because Perez doesn't actually pass the GBE regulations to get a work permit. But we have these really interesting situations where we can see here, Inigo Perez did join with Andoni Iraola at Bournemouth, but in a consultancy role. So he wasn't allowed to wear any of the club merch or anything like that, wasn't allowed to be pitch side or anything, but he was there. So the intention was that had things gone differently, he would have been the assistant coach at Bournemouth.
I rate your journalism on that. Like, that is a good pick, man. That is a serious pick. Eagle-eyed. Well done.
Well, it's thanks to Jamie Stewart, who actually, I sent him digging through the archives for this one, so I can't take any credit on this one. But yeah, a really interesting guy, and the crossover between him and Iraola is out in the open. He's talked about it himself, so I've got a quote here. So talking about Iraola, we have shared many years together in professional football. They played together at Athletic Club. They were both in that famous Marcelo Bielsa team. These guys are operating in the same circle. So Perez says, I won't try and fool anyone. The idea is similar, and that's why we work together. It doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. I'm not afraid of the comparison. So this is a guy who's worked with Iraola, has very much the same kind of ideas as Iraola, and his style of football is this new modern style that Guardiola was talking about. There's a few interesting quotes from Inigo Perez, who explains what he means by this. He says, our idea is to win the ball back as soon as possible and then attack very quickly. For the opposition never to get comfortable on the pitch. And that's what Pep Guardiola means by saying that modern football is not positional, because positional approaches are based around this idea of using the position of your players to build structures that can allow you to possess the ball and defend better. But what these guys are trying to do is they're taking that approach and saying, well, if they're trying to create these structures, why don't we try and break those structures down? Let's not allow them to get settled. So the opposition aren't going to get comfortable on the pitch with the way that these guys are playing.
That's what Bournemouth do, and we see it vividly in the Premier League. Yeah, so interesting.
Exactly. So this is what he's saying. This is what I like at Rayo. High pressing, direct play, dynamic position, so constantly, yes, still using structures. He mentions that too. They are using these structural ideas, but they're raising the rhythm. They're trying to increase the tempo of the game so that it's harder for these teams at the top of the league to be able to control the game in the way that they do. A kind of ordered chaos. Interesting use of the word, to create chances and score goals. But I think what's really interesting is that I don't think that Perez and Iraola are just carbon copies of one another. There are differences between the two of them.
Okay. Tell us.
We've got a couple of play style wheels just to show this. And what I like about this is that it shows that, broadly speaking, that these two guys are doing similar things. And this shows up in some of the metrics. So one of the things that Iraola has been very famous for in the past is using long balls as a way of destabilising opponents, right? So you play the ball long, it stops the opponent from being able to get into their defensive structures, and then you are well set up to win second balls. And it's a way that's becoming more and more popular in the Premier League. So we can see that in this season, Bournemouth right up there when it comes to attempted long balls, 74 long balls per 90 attempted. This has actually dropped down slightly from previous seasons where they were they were doing it even more. What we're seeing from Iraola is an attempt to maybe add a bit more control into his game. But we can see the same thing from Rayo Vallecano this season when it comes to long balls attempted, even higher than Bournemouth, 79.5 per 90 minutes. So these are two teams who are using long balls as a way of generating the conditions that they want in games. But there are some differences too. The famous thing about Andoni Iraola is his famous press. We've already seen Perez talk about the high pressing. I think, slight differences in the way that Perez presses. It is intense at times, but I think it's much more likely to drop off and be a bit more passive than you see with Iraola. And this shows up if we look at PPDA, which is a metric which it stands for passes per defensive action. So essentially what this is trying to say is how many passes can the opponent get before the defending team does something defensive. It's a pretty crude metric, but it gives us a good sense of defending intensity. And we can see this season, Bournemouth right at the top of this list, 8.77 PPDA. The smaller the number, the more intense the pressure, because you're allowing fewer passes before you make any kind of defensive action. If we actually look at La Liga for PPDA this season, we can actually see Rayo Vallecano much closer to mid-table with around 9.53. Now, they're still an intense pressing side, but maybe not quite so intense as Iraola. So there are differences there as well. But what you're getting with Inigo Perez is a guy who is using a lot of the same ideas as Andoni Iraola. And so I think a lot of teams, maybe towards the bottom of the table, can take a look at him and think, if we want to get the Iraola effect at our club, why don't we bring in his protege of sorts and see if we can actually take ourselves from being bottom of the table into being a comfortable mid-table side.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of their results here. And Vallecano have done really well, but their wins come against some of the smaller teams, right? So can he scale this up to go challenge in the Premier League, where we know the level is just absolutely insane?
Well, he has taken points off Barcelona and Real Madrid this season, and that was something that Iraola did as well. And I think a big part of that is because their approach is based around destabilising bigger oppositions as well. And we've seen that happening in the Premier League too. So I think there's nothing that says this kind of approach can't be, thrown onto a team at the bottom of the table in the Premier League and give you results not only against teams at the top end of the table, but at the bottom end as well. And that, that's the most important thing for the teams who want to solidify their place in the Premier League. It's not really beating the teams at the top, it's making sure you're getting results against teams at the bottom.
Okay, give me a name. Which team?
I mean, West Ham have got Nuno now, so maybe they're a bit more solidified. But they're a team who are always thinking, how do we make the next step up to change our play style to be able to challenge at the top? So yeah, those kind of teams I think would be a good landing place for him.
Okay, interesting. Alex, back to you now, bro. Who's made your list next?
Well, again, we're going across the table. We're going away from chaos and we're going back to control. And no one will be surprised now I've picked a manager of La Liga and my favourite league. It's Liam Rosenior, an Englishman.
Yes, another man we had on the Athletic FC recently, top guy.
Well, there's no beating around the bush here about which team he could be going to.
Yeah.
Since he's managing Chelsea's sister club, let's find out, could he be the next Enzo Maresca? This is Enzo Maresca's playstyle wheel. There's no surprises here. Chelsea press high, they dominate possession, they try and keep opponents pinned back and create chances. You know this. So let's look at Liam Rosenior's at Strasbourg from this season, and on the face of it, might look a bit different because they're not dominating possession as high up the pitch. They're actually spending a lot more time in deep build-up and less field tilt. Field tilt is keeping opponents pinned back towards their own goal, essentially. But that can be explained by the fact that Strasbourg aren't one of the best teams in France, and if you look at their possession numbers on a game-by-game basis, against the top teams, they don't tend to dominate. Against the weaker teams, they actually do. So look a bit more similar to Chelsea.
I guess the interesting question about Enzo Maresca that I always have is that it feels as though he's moving into this sort of high possession, high territory dominance kind of football at a point in time when a lot of the other managers who've utilised that are maybe moving away from it a little bit. I guess it raises questions about whether or not Chelsea are moving in the wrong direction at the wrong time, and how do you think that Rosenior would fit into that timeline?
I think last season I shared that concern a lot about Rosenior because Chelsea and Strasbourg essentially played the same way. But this season I actually think Rosenior's gone off in a bit of a different direction, and perhaps that can actually be seen in the one difference between Rosenior and Maresca at the moment, which is in the results. Chelsea have beaten Liverpool, PSG this season, this year rather, but have struggled against Sunderland, dropped points against Brighton, right? Rosenior's actually the opposite at Strasbourg. The teams they've lost to this season have been Lyon, Monaco, Marseille and Rennes. They drew against PSG, but they've beaten basically everyone in the bottom half of the table. So he's not suffering the same problem, and I wanted to figure out why. Couple obvious answers, I think it's fair to say. Rosenior is still a relatively young manager, so maybe he can be excused for not competing with the likes of Luis Enrique or the top managers, right? Also, despite Strasbourg not being one of the biggest clubs, have a massive wealth advantage over basically half of France, right? So that might be why he's able to dominate against weaker teams. But I do think playstyle comes into it and doing something a bit different to Maresca, just a little different, which is, I think, putting a greater emphasis on getting in behind defences before they're able to get back into their low block. And I've got an example of that in the game against Auxerre. So Strasbourg are in blue, Auxerre are in white, and you can see Auxerre pushed a few players up to press, but you can see they're very focused on defending. As Strasbourg come forward, we're going to see them try and disrupt this defence and try and pull these players out of position or get their players into space. So passes being played into their central midfielder. This is Barso, formerly of Brighton. He's going to receive the ball and pass out to the left wing back or left winger Diego Moreira. And when this pass is played, we're going to see the rotation start to take place. So this is a 3-4-3 system, if you want to picture it like that. This is Sebastian Anasi, he's the left-sided 10. He's going to drop and try and take this defender with him. This is Barso, who just had the ball, he's the midfielder. He's going to push forward and try and take his marker with him. And Moreira, after passing the ball backwards, he's going to come inside and try and take his marker with him. So as that move takes place, we can see the defenders start to follow, but they actually retract back into their shape. But Strasbourg have got these players now in space. Nanasi's going to be able to receive the ball and turn. And as soon as he does, we see both Barso and Moreira start jetting in behind into this space. But it's not just them, because as they make these runs, as this pass gets played, pay attention to this forward though. Joaquin Panicelli, Strasbourg's number 9, because before this pass is even being played, he's running offside. This is a run he consistently makes because he wants to get in behind, away from these defenders, so when the ball gets played through and the cross is able to come in, he's ahead of the defensive line but still behind the ball, and he's able to have a shot 1v1. He does end up missing this, but he's got into this position so many times that he scored 9 goals in Ligue 1 this season. In fact, in the top 5 leagues, only Harry Kane, Kylian Mbappe and Erling Haaland have actually scored more goals than him. So he's really on fire. Yeah. And that's actually no surprise given that Strasbourg, if you look at average chance quality by XG, they've got the best attack in Europe at the moment. So yes, there definitely are concerns about how adaptable this style of play is to the Premier League at the moment. Rosenior is maybe getting a bit of an easy ride with Chelsea's finances, but there is a lot of reason to be excited, and I think it's fair to say he is doing his own thing now.
Is Ligue 1 a good breeding ground for managers to earn their trade, to earn their stripes? Because, I mean, you talk about young managers. There's a recent young manager, Will Still, who ended up going to Southampton and didn't do that well in conversion. I mean, is it a good place for him to hone his skills?
Well, I've been told we can't make the show an hour and a half long, so I'll try to keep this answer quick. Ligue 1, I think if you go back 5 years, the managerial quality was definitely quite low. I think we covered this in the Ligue 1 show earlier in the year, but most of the managers were French managers who hadn't really had much experience abroad. I think that is changing now. I think around half the league or so is made up of managers who've coached in other places and now have a reason to coach in France. But it's definitely a fair point to say that I think the managerial quality, like the tactical level, is still a bit below the Premier League. Maybe that's why, for example, Will Still, he goes from doing pretty well in France to going to the Championship and starting to struggle and his approach not working quite as well.
It is worth saying that Will Still had good underlying numbers. I've said still. Did I say still twice?
Still is fine.
Will Still had good underlying numbers in the Championship.
Will Still.
And there's another manager who actually developed in Ligue 1 who is in the top 4 of the Premier League right now, in Régis Le Bris.
Régis Le Bris, yes.
It goes both ways. So.
Good shout. Knowledge there, John. All right, well, one of the most influential managers is, of course, Pep Guardiola, who's also actually tweaked his style once again. Here's Sam Tai to tell us why.
Welcome to What's Changed, presented by BOYLE Sports. Pep Guardiola has developed a new tactic to get the best out of his attacking stars, and it's different. Let's take a look at what he's doing and why it's working. Pep has always wanted possession and control in the centre of the pitch, but he's pulling more players into the middle than ever before. Even the wingers are taking up narrow positions. This gives City a numerical superiority in the centre, which they use to create intricate passing combinations to beat the press. It's a tactic that has seen Ryan Cherki flourish as he can play through balls to Erling Haaland, while Jeremy Doku can still do his thing from the wide areas when City get further up the pitch. This looks like Guardiola's response to the physical, man-to-man nature of the league. He's using teams' aggression against them. But this is risky. Quick combos in these areas can go wrong. And if you give the ball away centrally, close to your own goal, you're at risk of conceding a big chance. Ultimately, Pep is banking on the technical qualities of his elite players not to make those mistakes. Perhaps that's part of the reason why Phil Foden is playing deeper than ever.
Well, so we went from League 1 with Alex. Where are you heading to, John?
We're going to the Bundesliga.
Okay.
And talking of Pep Guardiola, we're going to go to a guy who many people see as potentially Guardiola's replacement, but I'm not looking at Vincent Kompany, which is who I'm mentioning. I'm actually going to talk a really rogue option here.
Go on.
Vincent Kompany's assistant manager, Rene Maric.
What? Has he actually managed a club yet?
He has not actually managed a senior club yet. He is a really interesting character because what you got with Rene Maric is a guy who went into coaching at the age of 17.
Okay.
At the same time, he goes to university, does a psychology degree, and at that time, he starts a tactics blog in Germany called Spielverlagerung, which a lot of people of my generation, that's where we learned a lot of
I was going to say, it's like your Bible, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A lot of our knowledge was picked up from there. So really interesting background. Actually, through that, he meets Thomas Tuchel, who's impressed with him, but ends up working with Marco Rose when he was at Salzburg. Marco Rose goes to Borussia Mönchengladbach, goes to Borussia Dortmund, all of the Borussias he's got covered. He then leaves him at that point, but then joins Jesse Marsch, another coach within the Red Bull family. But he was at Leeds United, so he's got experience of the Premier League as an assistant coach there. And then from that point onwards, he moved into the system at Bayern Munic. He is a Bayern Munic fan. Since Vincent Kompany has joined the club, he's been made one of the assistants there. And I think what's really interesting about him is that he is at the forefront of the tactical game. Not only does he understand the game really well and the tactical nuances of it, but he also has the ability to project onto the future the way that maybe the tactical landscape is evolving. And I think that's really obvious at Bayern Munich. Now, we've just done a long show on Bayern Munich, so if you want to see the ins and outs of the tactical aspects of that, do go and check that out. But I think that Bayern Munich are one of the clubs that are at the forefront of where the game is headed. And I think that Rene Maric's fingertips are all over that. So yeah, I think what a lot of people would expect to see Rene Maric in the Premier League in a few seasons' time, maybe in Manchester on the bench alongside Vincent Kompany. But I think Rene Maric does have the ambition to be a senior coach. He's been approached by various clubs in the past, but has decided not to go into the senior coaching role at this point. He's still very young. He's younger than me. Can you believe? Wow. Can you believe it? A young whippersnapper like me.
I cannot believe anyone in the world is younger than you, John.
It's hard to get your head around, I know. So plenty of time ahead of him. But what I think would be really interesting here is if a smart club comes along and thinks, this guy is obviously very good at the coaching side. He's at the forefront of tactical evolution. What if we bring him in, make him our senior coach, and see where we go from there? Almost gazump Bayern and bring him in. And I'm thinking, the smart teams. Everyone talks about your Brightons, your Brentfords. Brighton in particular sort of feels like a club who would do that. They did it already with Fabian Hürzeler. So yeah, this is my sort of secret rogue pick. Is
get him in.
Get him in. See what he can do, and could work out really well for them.
Okay, tell you what. You mentioned Vincent Kompany there, and it got me thinking about another player who is now a manager. Currently in the Championship, though, is Frank Lampard. Obviously, when he was in the Premier League, his record was a bit patchy. Everton, Chelsea, we know that. But Coventry are currently top of the Championship, scoring some great goals, and actually looking potentially at this stage like they can make their way up to the Premier League. I mean, should we give him his dues?
I think so. I've had a look at them this week, and something that really stands out to me is the underlying numbers. And from Frank Lampard teams in the past, I think the attack has always been pretty good across his time, but defence has always let him down, I think. What really stands out to me is that Coventry have only conceded 13 goals in 15 games, and the XG against is only 15 as well, and they're not conceding that many shots or territory either. So that, I think, is a really big sign that Frank Lampard is tightening up on his weaknesses.
Has he learnt from his mistakes, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, coming back to what Alex has been talking about with a lot of these possession coaches, what we're starting to see now is the need for these coaches to be tactically diverse, to be able to shift between different approaches. And I think having watched a few of his games for Coventry this week, That's the thing that stands out for me. They don't necessarily seem to dominate in the way that you expect these teams to dominate. They've only got, I think, 52% possession on average through the course of the season. This is a much more savvy team. They're able to sort of mirror what the opponent are doing and then use that as a way of finding weaknesses against it. I wonder whether or not this means that if Coventry do make it to the Premier League, whether or not they'll be well set up to be that kind of tactically flexible team that are used to playing with not all of the ball, and whether or not that will put them in good stead. But I guess the flip side of that question then is that what does that mean for him in terms of coaching maybe a bigger side in the Premier League? Again, it depends on the team that he's brought in for.
Maybe it's not the Premier League. Maybe he could be going to Europe. And this is the interesting question. Could he do his job elsewhere?
Vincent Kompany did it recently. We were just speaking about him. But it's such a hard question to answer. Let's take Kompany, for example, comparing to Russell Martin. Two managers who came up from the Championship, as John was saying, playing possession-based football that didn't necessarily suit the Premier League. They both failed in the Premier League. Their clubs got relegated. Kompany went to Bayern, absolutely smashed it. Yeah. Russell Martin recently went to Rangers, got fired. But is that because Martin's a bad manager or because Rangers weren't suited to his style of play? There's so many variables to consider, but the thing with Frank Lampard, for me, is his ability to compete against the elite managers. And from the sounds of what John was saying, maybe the answer is yes. But the thing that's concerned me before with Lampard, I've got his record here against Pep Guardiola, Mikel Arteta and Jurgen Klopp across his time at Chelsea and Everton. He's just seemed to be consistently outclassed by the top managers. And I think if he's going to thrive in Europe and really thrive at the top level, he's going to need to find a way to, not just come up with a tactical plan to beat these guys, but also in-game tweaks, like managing these games. And from what John was saying about, mirroring the opposition and being a bit more adaptable, maybe he's on that path.
Yeah, well, let's see if this all comes to play, if Coventry actually get promoted.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football